Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome you all. Thanks very much for being here with us in this afternoon. Today we have the pleasure of having author Denise Santos with us. I'm Katia Vale, Schools and Exams Marketing Manager at Cambridge, and I'm talking to you from our office in São Paulo. We would like to hear from you. Where are you joining from? Use our chat box to send us messages. Hello, Alessandra, from Focus Idiomas. Hello, Giovanna. Good afternoon, Alessandra. Victoria is here with us. Chile, great. Bauru, Curitiba, Brasília. So good to see so many of you from all over Brazil joining us. As you know, this is the last webinar of a series, the Global Changer webinar series. And if by any chance you have missed one of them or would like to watch it again, we have the recordings in our YouTube channel, the Cambridge Brazil YouTube channel. We have a playlist there, and you can watch all past webinars. I think we have a slide with the names. Yes, look for Global Changer webinars, and then you will see the ones that we have had since August. We had one a month, and Denise is here to close this series with a golden key, right, Denise?
Hope so.
I'm sure you will. Moving on in our slides.
Sorry, a technological glitch here. Yeah.
No problem. So here you see a picture of the webinars we have had since August. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. You can send questions to Denise throughout the presentation, but please use the Q&A tool here in Zoom. Denise will answer your question by the end of the presentation. Also, at the end, in the chat box, you will see a link to give us feedback, and from this feedback form, you can download your certificate. And with no further ado, I would like to hand over to Denise with the theme of why cross-curricular activities to teenagers. Have a good presentation, Denise. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Katia. Thank you very much, everybody at Cambridge CUP for having me here today. And mostly, thank you very much, all the lovely people who are there today. I can see people from all around Brazil, a colleague from Chile as well. So this is really, really nice to see all these lovely people there joining us here today to talk about cross-curricular activities for teenagers. And basically what we'll do is to explore a little bit why we should be doing cross-curricular activities in our lessons. And the way I'll approach this talk is the following. I'll start by trying to make some connections between the term cross-curricular and CLIL. So I'll explain what CLIL is in detail as we move along. And then I'll talk a little bit about the 4 C's, which is a well-established framework within CLIL that help us understand what to do, how to plan, how to teach, how to assess when we teach cross-curricular. Then we'll look at a lesson, at a CLIL lesson for Global Changer. We'll look at a lesson that I've written for Global Changer. And what I'll do, I'll try to unpack this lesson and to look at it to see where these 4 C's exist, if they do at all, and how we approach these 4 C's within the lesson. And finally, we'll look at some more practical ideas as to how we can integrate content and learning in our lessons, what we can do before the lesson, what we can do during the lesson, what we can do after the lesson. So that's the plan. I have a very ambitious plan as usual. Let's hope we have time to do everything that I'd like to do with you today. So more people coming in. Welcome everybody. Lovely to see everybody there. So let's start. I would like to start asking for some help from the audience right now. I'd like you to use the chat box to answer this question. When you think of cross-curricular, what idea or ideas come to your mind? If you just can, close your eyes, briefly think, okay, cross-curricular makes me think of, and write down what you think when you think about cross-curricular. There's no right or wrong answers. It's your thinking process. I would be very interested in seeing what you think when you hear this word cross-curricular. What is in your mind? Let's see some ideas in the chat box, please. You just need a brave one to start, and I hope other ideas will come up. Music, songs, and rhymes. Good. Yeah, keep going, keep going. Cross-curricular makes me think of, complete the sentence. Okay, beyond the book. Just taking some notes here. Beyond the book. What else? Cross-curricular makes me think of filling gaps. Okay. What else? Okay. School subjects, involving and engaging students beyond the book. What else? Okay. Fun and engaging activities. Anything else? These are all legitimate, loving, playful learning. Anything else? Like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. We're basically talking about linking different subjects together, having this dialogue between different subjects. Is teaching English and at the same time looking at things within maths and geography and history and arts and music, and maybe why this is so fun and this is so playful, like lots of you mentioned, and this is so cool. And lots of you mentioned this idea about beyond the book, isn't it? But why? Let's wonder, would it be possible to have all these things within the book itself? So let's all have these questions in our mind just to start thinking about these things as we move along into the talk. Okay, so now in more practical terms, we thought about ideas before. Now again, with your help, you are all English teachers, I assume. So I have a list of, let's say, pedagogical practices here on this slide, and I'm going to read them, and you're just going to jot down again in the chat box, yes or no to my answer, to my questions, okay? So if we have a listening task about life in medieval society, is this cross-curricular, do you think? Yes or no? What do you think? We have a listening task and the text, yes, isn't it? We're talking about history, it is cross-curricular. If we have a common theme, for example, local environmental issues, it could be health, it could be work, it could be the environment, a common theme that is explored by different subjects at the same time in school. It is cross-curricular as well. Somebody has already told us there. If we have a term-long project about hip-hop, is it cross-curricular? Yes or no? Yes, it is, no doubt about it. We are teaching English, talking about music. What if we have a game reviewing art styles? Vocabulary, is it cross-curricular? A game, a short game in the class, something that wouldn't take a lot of time. Is it cross-curricular? Yeah, it is, isn't it? If we have a PE class led in English, so the PE class given by, say, the PE teacher or by you as an English teacher, the class is led in English. You're using English as a medium of instruction. Is it cross-curricular? It is, yes, it is. What about a textbook unit or a section, not a unit, but a small section about financial education where students would have to get acquainted with some maths concepts? Is it cross-curricular? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes, it is. So all all these pedagogical practices, they are all examples of cross-curricular practices that we can engage in. But the problem I see with this list is we are talking about very different things here, aren't we? We're talking about things that can last not a long time, like a game, like a game. We're talking about tasks, the listening task. We're talking about textbook units. We're talking about a term-long project. So we're talking about different things. If we are to plan for these things, if we are to teach these things, if we are to assess these things, we are going to need different tools to do all these things, isn't it? The way we approach a warmer, the way we approach a game is different from the way we approach a project, right? But we're talking cross-curricular links all these things. So the big question, I think, is, do we have a conceptual framework that can give us tools, concepts that might help us engage in nice, educational, solid cross-curricular practice, doing all these different things? And this is where CLIL comes to the fore of our talk today. CLIL is the theoretical framework that is going to give us this support, if you like, for us to do these things. There are other theoretical supports. I've chosen to talk about CLIL because I think it gives us some very nice tools for us to start thinking about all these issues. So let's have a look and see what is CLIL. CLIL is a theoretical approach that developed in Europe in the 1990s, basically with the whole idea of integration, among all the European countries. And it was also inspired by work done in Canada in immersion bilingual education. So it's been around for a few years now. So we're talking about 30 years plus that it's been around, and it's gaining strength. It's very strong here in Europe. I live in England. I'm talking to you from England. It's very strong in continental Europe, very strong in Canada as well. And it's gaining a lot of strength and momentum in Brazil, in places like Brazil as well. So CLIL, the acronym stands for, the C is for content, the L for language, the I for integrated, and the final L for learning. So as you can see, CLIL is content and language integrated learning. So we're talking about teaching and learning, not only content, not only maths or geography or history, but also teaching and learning language as well. And by language, we're talking about L2. We're talking about a second language. So it's very important before we start to see that content and language have the same status, they have the same focus, if you like, and they have to be integrated from planning, including implementation, to assessment throughout the process in true CLIL. In the next slide, we're going to look at how we can integrate content and language in some very basic terms. We'll have lots of time during this talk to look at some very concrete examples. Still, I'm just giving the background that I think might help us understand some of the things we're going to talk about in more practical terms later. So let's think about doing CLIL with physical education in mind, and how can we integrate content and language? Okay, so this integration, the content, for example, will be basically the themes and topics in physical education. So say, for example, we might be teaching something related to playing volleyball, where the students had to understand the rules, understand the techniques, use the vocabulary, this sort of stuff. But it's more than that. We have to move from simple content to more than that, to knowledge, skills, and competences to keep developing knowledge. So we are talking about teaching the content of that subject area, but also the tools that students need to keep on learning and thinking like people who operate in these subject areas. So let me give you an example. This comes from the English Department of Education. The Department of Education is the main institution, if you like, that organizes education in the country. It would be what in some countries is equivalent to the Ministry of Education. Here in England, it's called the Department of Education. So PE teachers, this is the main aims that they have for the teaching of PE in secondary schools. All students that have to develop competence to excel in a broad range of physical activities. They are expected to be physically active for sustained periods of time, to engage in competitive sports and activities, and lead healthy, active lives. So my point in showing you this information is to show you that PE teachers are not only interested in going to the gym, going somewhere and playing a game and teaching rules and having students play that particular game, if you like. There's much more than that. They need to help their learners understand the importance of physical activity for their own lives. So this is what we have to do while we teach English and we look at different subject areas at the same time. It is a little bit daunting, isn't it? Because all of a sudden we are not only English teachers, we are teachers of other subject areas as well, but it's very, very exciting to be able to teach English with this broad range of aims that we can achieve with our students as well. One more thing before we look at the 4 C's. When we talk about CLIL, it's very important to understand CLIL in a continuum, like we see in this double-headed arrow on the slide. On the one hand, we have what we call hard CLIL. So this is hard CLIL. This is CLIL, super CLIL, if you like. This is what happens, for example, in bilingual schools, where students will go, fully bilingual schools, where students will go and learn all the subject areas in a particular language. So there is this total immersion in the content and this focus on the content, and there is no focus on the second language, if you like. So the teaching and assessment and everything, the focus is on content of subject areas. On the other side of the arrow, we have what we call soft CLIL. And this happens when, for example, we as English teachers, we have a unit in our textbook, or we have a lesson, a 50-minute lesson, where the focus is a particular topic from a subject area. For example, say, let's go back to the hip hop example we mentioned in the previous slide. We talk about the history of hip hop, for example, in a lesson, in a unit, and the focus in that particular case, let's say, is not on the content, but is on language. We want to teach vocabulary. We want to teach particular expressions of hip hop around the world. We're not focused on the content itself, but we're focused on the language that students need to understand. So this would be the two extremes. But most of us would operate, I think, somewhere in between when we teach. We wouldn't be working on very hard CLIL unless we work in particular institutions that do hard CLIL, and we do soft CLIL, but we sometimes may be working with some units or with some lessons that we tend to have our focus more on content and sometimes more on language. So we are somewhere in between. So there is no right or wrong. Sometimes, and this fluctuation is totally acceptable, and this is CLIL. So a continuum of possibilities, basically. So what are these 4 C's? The 4 C's are a conceptual framework that has been proposed to guide people who use CLIL, a map, so to speak, that would help teachers plan their lessons, implement their lessons, and evaluate their lessons after they teach. I can see there's a question there. If you don't mind, shall we keep this question to the end? Keep jotting your questions down there. We can go back to them in the end to address. It's important that you keep your mind thinking and raising some questions while I talk, isn't it? So that we are connected. So the 4 C's are C for content, C for communication, C for cognition, and C for culture. And in this next slide, I show you how this framework is usually conceptualized. So three main, as you can see, the center of the model, we have three C's in this triangle, which is the core of the framework. We have content, we have communication, and we have cognition, as the three main elements in the framework. Around this triangle, around these three elements, we have culture surrounding content, communication, and cognition. So these are the four C's: communication, content, cognition, culture. And as you can see, out of the framework, there is also context, which, confusingly enough, it's another C, isn't it? But that would be the fifth C, but it's not a C that makes up the framework as such. But in this model, we always have this idea of context surrounding the framework. And that's because the framework, the four C's, need to be understood within particular contexts. Always. They don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in particular contexts where people will appropriate the framework to teach CLIL in ways that make sense in that particular context. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this in the subsequent slides. What I'll do now, I'll just break down these four C's and talk a little bit more about them before we look at examples from Global Changer. Okay, so let's start with content. Content is the subject matter. So basically, are we talking about geography, history, arts, music, and so on and so forth? So let's take geography as an example in this slide. When we talk about content, we have themes, topics within the subject matter. Again, an example would be deforestation within geography. And that could be looked at in a lesson, so in 15 minutes, or it could be done in a unit. So we would take a few lessons to cover that. It could be done in a term-long project, like we saw earlier on. The important thing for us to remember when we talk about content in CLIL is that content leads the way. So all decisions will be made after decisions about content have been made. Another very important issue to remember is that when we're talking about content, is not the accumulation of knowledge. We don't want our students to learn facts, and regurgitate these facts. We want them to learn these facts, appropriate these facts, and create new knowledge with the facts they learn, and develop skills to keep on learning that particular subject area, like we saw in the example of PE. When we talk about cognition, we are talking about thinking processes that learners have to engage in when they are learning, right? So when we are learning by definition is a heavily demanding cognitive activity, isn't it? We are learning and our brain is just bursting in activity at moments of learning. But this fact has two important implications within CLIL. The first one, we need to think about cognition within the level of learning, within the level of cognition that our students can have at that particular moment. So let me give you an example here. Suppose we are doing CLIL in a science unit, and we want to explore the effects of arts in our brains, for example. So when we look at arts, what happens in our brain when we are exposed to artistic manifestations? And that would be a science module where we would understand, the science of the brain. If we're teaching 12-year-olds, we would have to approach that in very light ways, isn't it? We wouldn't be able to be talking about complex neurotransmissions because our students wouldn't be able to understand what we would be talking about. We would have to treat things very lightly with diagrams, simple diagrams, in ways that our 12-year-old students would be able to understand. So what I'm saying is we need to address the cognitive level of our students. This is very important. The second important thing is that when we think about thinking skills, we need to think lower order thinking skills, moving on to higher order thinking skills. So here I'm talking about Bloom taxonomy. So when we talk about lower order skills and higher order skills, let's have the triangle of Bloom's taxonomy in our minds. And lower order skills would be remembering at the base of the triangle, at the base of the pyramid, remembering, understanding, applying, and then moving up. Higher order thinking skills would be analyzing, evaluating, and creating. I'm not saying that younger children, younger teenagers cannot do higher order thinking skills. They can evaluate, they can create, obviously they can, but they will be evaluating and creating and analyzing, evaluating and creating in different ways that a 17-year-old would be following the same movements from lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills. So this is cognition in CLIL. When we talk about communication in CLIL, we're talking about language, basically. It's the language we teach, the second language, L2. So language learning, language using, and like I said before, content will orient the language, the decisions about language. So if we are doing a maths unit where students are learning, for example, to measure areas of a square room, then we would need to teach our students to say, so we need to multiply this by that to get the area. And that has a consequence. We need to rethink sometimes grammatical chronology, because we can talk about how to calculate the area of a square using the simple present, isn't it? You say, well, this number times this number equals area, isn't it? Side by side equals area. So this is a simple present. But it might be the case that some more sophisticated structures might be needed for students to talk about these issues. And I can think here, for example, about the first conditional. In this situation, for me, it's very likely that students might need to say things like, if you multiply this by that, then you'll get this. So a student would be using the first conditional at a very early level, let's say still A1 or A2, but having to use a more sophisticated structure. Within CLIL, this is not a problem. On the contrary, it's an opportunity to teach something that students really need to learn. So what we can do in these situations is teach those structures, put them on the board, have students look at them as reference when they are talking, when they are interacting, and not worry too much about explaining, okay, so the first conditional works this way. That's not the point. And when we talk about communication, we are also talking about interaction. And here it's important to note that in CLIL, we're talking about two types of interaction: the prototypical interaction, which is interpersonal interaction, the interaction that involves two or more people in groups, in pairs, thinking, scaffolding, learning together. But we're also talking about intrapersonal interaction. So it's interaction with ourselves. So it's students interacting with themselves in their thinking, mobilizing cognitive skills to do particular things. So there's this interaction within the student, within the individual. This is very important. And as you can see, this is communication together with cognition, making all these elements in the 4 C's very much related. Culture surrounding everything. The aim here is not to teach cultural facts only, although it's important to learn some cultural facts. But the focus is to develop this notion of global citizenship and intercultural awareness, understanding. So if I'm learning about a particular habit in a particular society, for example, it's the aim in CLIL is not to have this box of facts for students to memorize and regurgitate in their answers. Basically, we're talking about making connections, thinking about myself. How do I relate with those people? Do I have practices that are similar to that culture? In what ways do we differ? In what ways are we similar? How do different people around the world understand the same thing? With this idea that things are not necessarily wrong or right, but most of the time it's just that people see things in different ways. So this is the objective within CLIL. And finally, let's talk about context. Like I said, context is this surrounding elements around the 4 Cs. All these things need to be taken account when we do CLIL. The time available. If you only have a lesson a month, this is what you have. You only have a lesson a month, and try to make the most of it. If you have 2 lessons a week, oh, fantastic. Then you can do a superb work with that. It will be much better, obviously. But it's the time you have and the time you make available for this type of activities. The curriculum demands. Does your school, the institution where you work, does the institution support you in this? Is this part of the curriculum? This is going to affect the way you teach CLIL. Obviously, your familiarity with the content, if you have to teach a lesson about nuclear fission, this might be a little bit too challenging, isn't it? But you might find ways to do it in simpler ways, and I'll talk a little bit later how we can do that. But obviously, we'll be more comfortable in approaching some subject areas and some themes than others. The students level is another contextual feature. The resources you have if you're teaching CLIL through using science. Do you have models? Can you do experiments? All these things. And co-teaching in CLIL is a very good practice to be done. You having your colleagues from other subject areas teaching with you, coming to your class, teaching together with you. So sometimes joining lessons, if that's a possibility in your institution, and teaching together. So what you have to do is to make CLIL yours, applying your contextual features within your teaching. Okay, so this is pretty much the background of all the things I would like to talk about today. So let's move on to some more practical stuff, and let's have a look at a CLIL section, session. Like I said, this is a lesson, if you like, that I've written for global changes. So this is level 1, unit 4. It's part of a unit called We All Have a Story. So just to contextualize a little bit further, we're talking about level A1, A2 here. So this is a lesson called We All Have a Story, and this is the very end of the lesson. In terms of vocabulary, the focus in the lesson was verbs we need to tell stories. So things like tell, help, start, watch, these verbs that we often use to tell stories. The grammar point of the lesson is the simple past, regular verbs, and some irregular verbs. The most frequent irregular verbs, they have already been taught when we reach this point. And then we have this double spread. On the left side, we have the reading, which is a timeline, illustrating the history of storytelling, starting from cave painting, moving through history until our days, where we talk about social media and so on and so forth. On the right side, we see the activities. And what I'll do in the next slide is to use an X-ray, if you like, for us to look at the activities and see how they approach these 4 Cs, if they approach at all. Okay, so and the reason I do that, and this is something I often do in my presentations, I think it's very, very important for us teachers to know exactly what an activity is doing. So when we look at an activity on a page, something is there, right? So what can this activity do the way it is there? So it is doing this or that, it's not doing that or that other thing, because it cannot do everything. And by knowing exactly what the activity does, we can make decisions about what we need to do, what we need to add, what we need to change, what we need to follow the way it is, because that's what we want to do. But if we don't understand what the activity does, then we'll just be doing things without knowing why we are doing them. And this is not very good practice. So let's have a look at activities 1 and 2. So these are the first activities. So as you can see, first thing is asking students to skim through the text and make some predictions, isn't it? Predictions about content. So what is the content that we're going to find in this particular text? And then they make their predictions, and then they read and they check their predictions. So that's activity number 1. I hope you're reading activity number 1 while I'm speaking. And then activity number 2, they have the chance to read again, and they listen to the audio recording at the same time. And then what they basically do, they read and listen for general ideas, making sentences about general ideas of the text. So if we try to explain all these things that I've just mentioned in more technical terms, when they do skimming for prediction of content, they are using lower order thinking skills. They are remembering things that they already know, isn't it? So it's remembering. And when they read for verification, still within activity number 1, they start using some higher order thinking skills, because now it's not only remembering, it's a bit of applying knowledge and also analyzing content as well. So we're moving from lot to hot, which is good in CLIL. Remember, this cognitive work, moving from lot to hot, is very good. And then the second activity, basically, they are listening for general ideas. Basically, this is basically more lower order thinking skills. They are remembering. They are also understanding a little bit, but still at the very lower level of the pyramid. So let's think 4 C's now here. So do we have content in this activity? Yes, we do have content, because we are going back to the verbs that I mentioned earlier on. Remember, the verbs are all there: tell, start, and also the objects in activity 1. So this is content related to that particular theme. Are we doing cognition? Yes, the cognitive work is very good. We have a movement from lot to hot in the first one. We have lot in the second one. It's good. Do we have communication? We do, but we have intrapersonal communication as it is now. We don't have interpersonal communication. You can add that if you want to, but it's not there as it is. There isn't much of culture there, so which is fine. We cannot do everything. The point is not to have everything in every single activity. The point is to understand what we're doing so that we can assess the balance, whether things are being approached in a balanced way, the 4 C's. Okay, so let's move on. Second activity, it's vocabulary work. Students are asked to complete sentences using these 4 words. So what's going on here? They need to use vocabulary. They need to apply knowledge of vocabulary, knowledge of content as well. An application in the Bloom taxonomy is very much between the lower level to the higher level. The interaction, again, is very much intrapersonal as it is. You can always make it interpersonal if you change the way it is suggested in the text. Moving on, we still have pretty much the same characteristics, if you like. Students are asked to label the pictures on the left-hand side to the options that appear in the text. So again, we have pretty much vocabulary, we have content going on, and to do the activities, they have to read for detail, both for the first one and also for the second one. They need to understand, this is a lower order thinking skill, but they also need to analyze. So we're moving up in the Bloom taxonomy to a higher order thinking skill. So this is what the activity suggests in these first exercises. The final exercises, the final section, we have 3 sections: a think, a web quest, and a video. Have a skim through the think section just for you to know what's being asked, and also the web quest. So as you can see, in the think section, students are encouraged to analyze a particular situation and to evaluate it. When you ask, what is good about it? Is there anything bad? We are asking for an evaluation. So we are now operating at a very high level of the Bloom taxonomy. This is hot. And in the web quest brings in the cultural elements. Students will have to research about a particular issue, and they will know, if they don't, that there are cave paintings in Brazil, quite spectacular ones that they might not know about. And so this is a fact that is good to know. And if you want to develop this a little bit further into global awareness, then you need to explore this a little bit further. Okay, so this is an anatomy of a lesson. So we looked at what the lesson suggested, what it did. We sort of explored ideas. Okay, so it does this very well, but it doesn't do this other thing. Is this a problem? Do I need to add something else? And this is the kind of thinking that I recommend that teachers who want to work with CLIL keep doing all the time. So what can we do if we want to do these things in a solid kind of way? So let's start with before the lesson. Before the lesson, we have to plan in detail. And this could be bad news about CLIL, because planning needs to be very detailed if you want to carry out a solid teaching experience for your students. And we know that time is an issue when we teach, but there are some ways to make this a little bit lighter. And one suggestion I have is to look up content-specific vocabulary. So if you're going to teach about say the art styles, start putting together a glossary, if you like, with vocabulary specific, vocabulary, also structures that would be interesting for students to use in their discussions. And this compilation can be shared by everybody, can be shared by students as well, and by other teachers that might be teaching in the same school or even other schools. If you work together with colleagues, and if you put this work together, then it might not be so heavy for anyone, and you can share resources that colleagues have put together as well. I recommend flipped learning as well. So flipped learning, just to refresh our memories, this learning that occurs before the lesson is asking students to study particular topics or to read particular texts or watch videos to get acquainted with the content before the lesson. And remember, when I talk about content, I'm referring to the subject area content, I'm not talking about language. I'm talking about the content they are going to look at in the lesson. So in our example of the timeline of storytelling, you might ask students to watch some videos before, or to read a little bit about it, or to read about one particular aspect of storytelling across throughout history, but have them do some preparation, if you like, for the lesson, because that will help them work in the lesson in more sophisticated ways. Liaise with colleagues from other departments. So if you're going to teach about something you're not quite sure, talk to your colleague who is in charge of teaching that particular subject area. If possible, invite this person to come to your class and do some teaching for you. You might even go to the other class at the same time and do some English teaching at the same time, if that's the case, or if possible, co-teach, teach together. That is an even better idea. In your planning, think 4 C's. So you have your lesson plan. After your lesson plan is ready, X-ray your lesson plan, thinking about, is there communication here? Is there content? Is there culture? Is there cognition? Is there culture? And see the balance. Like I said before, don't try to have everything at the same time. This is absolutely impossible. The important thing is to have a balance and make sure you work with the 4 elements, with the 4 C's in an integrated manner. Think lot to hot. So start by doing some lower order thinking skills activities, move on to higher order thinking skills activities. And let me give you an example. If you're exploring a picture, for example, suppose it's the opening page of a unit. Start this process with lower order thinking skills by asking students to describe what they can see. So what do you see? Oh, there's this person here doing this and that, and this person is in this particular scenario. Describe what they can see, and move on to higher order thinking skills in this exploration of the picture. Ask questions such as, why do you think this person is there? What happened before the picture was taken? What is going to happen after the picture is taken? And start using other thinking skills, that involve analysis, that involve evaluation in their descriptions. So you can move within a simple activity. You can move from lot to hot, or you can move within the lesson. You can start by doing lot, and hot. And you can do that as well. Again, flexibility is the key word, and keep changing, keep doing different things, but make sure you have this movement clear in your minds. And check the teacher's books. The teacher's books are there to help you, and someone may have already thought about all the things that you need to think about before your lesson. Let me give you an example with Game Changer. This is a lesson, a clear lesson in Game Changer that has this dialogue with physical education. So this is a double spread, remember. So on the left-hand side, there is this reading. It's a fact file about the Olympic Games, a short history. So this is what students need to read. The activities are on the other side. But if you go to the teacher's book in Game Changer, you have detailed ideas, suggestions as to how to teach the activities in the classroom. And you also have things like boxes like this one. So there is this box was taken from the teacher's book with background information about the theme, about the content. So somebody has already, researched these things, has already, written about these things to help you teach the lesson. Sometimes we just forget that the teacher's book exists, but it's always worth having a look, because you might find there things that are very helpful for you. During the lesson, let me see if I'm doing what time. Okay, so during the lesson, elicit students' prior knowledge as often as possible. Chances are students know already a lot about the content. They might even know more than you do. And that's not a problem. We need to be very clear that students can know more than us, and that's not a problem at all. We are the experts in the teaching. We are the experts in putting all these things together and helping them learn even more. But if they know more facts, if they know more, issues, that's not a problem. On the contrary, this is very, very good. Use students' knowledge to help yourself and to help other students as well. Encourage students to speak in English as much as possible, but if needed, use students L1 if it's necessary, and that's not a problem. If we're talking about discussions that involve thinking skills that are very hard to be done in English, use L1. This is totally acceptable in CLIL. When you're teaching, have your focus clear. What's my focus now? Is it on content or is it on language? Or is it on both? If the focus is on content and students make a language mistake, don't worry about it. Focus on the content. It's important for students to get that right. If your focus is on the language, then okay, now it's time to focus on the language. So make that very clear in your mind, and to decide where feedback should be given and in what direction. Write down any emergent language that pops up. Emergent language is the language that comes up, language that wasn't planned, that wasn't expected, and that students produce correctly or incorrectly, but which is very relevant in that particular situation. For example, I can think about, beginners who talk about their an event in the past, and they don't know the simple past. They haven't studied the simple past yet, but they need to use certain verbs in the past. Just write down those verbs in the past on the board. Students use them as reference and try to recycle those verbs. Find opportunities to incorporate into new lessons in the future. Don't just discard the emergent language because they are this type of language is really, really important. We can talk about emergent language in the whole webinar, isn't it? Differentiate. You know that some students will be faster than others. Some students will finish things faster than others. So use that in these students' own benefits by asking them to do other things, or in your own benefit and the other students as well. Ask these students to help other students, for example. So try to differentiate as much as possible. And think and talk like historians, geographers, artists, scientists. This is what CLIL is all about. Let me give you an example. Again, going back to the activity about the Olympic Games in ancient times. This is an activity, this is a vocabulary activity where students have to match the pictures from a vase to particular actions. So basically it's a content, it's a vocabulary activity. But this is CLIL, so let's extend this a little bit more. Let's do some PE with this. So let's ask our students to stand up, simulate those movements, do exactly what it's written there. Just try that out and talk about how do you feel when you do that? What do you think are what are good things about it? What are some potential risks of doing those things? So let's try to do some PE together with English as well. And this example comes from level 3 in Global Changer. So this is geography CLIL lesson. It's a text about teenage happiness. So what teenagers in the world have the highest levels of happiness. So there's lots of information. There's also a bar graph, which is enlarged on the other side of the slide. So how can we help our students think like geographers if we work on this lesson? One suggestion, for example, we can ask them to find the information in the written text that corresponds to the information given in the bar graph, which is the information in the circle I have just highlighted. So this is something that we can help our students do. We can encourage our students to say more things about the graphs, to make comparisons between these teenagers in the listed countries and teenagers in their own countries if they have this information, and use the text, the language in the text. For example, things like according to and things like percentages, which are very important in geography, are very important when we describe facts that we see from other sources. Try to encourage our students to use the language from these texts in their own interactions. So this is behaving like a geographer, isn't it? Looking at a phenomenon and trying to identify issues and trying to look at problems and solutions and comparing with their own environments. After the lesson, reflect about it, encourage students' reflection. What have we done right? What have we done wrong? How can we improve? Have some self-evaluation forms for those reflections, or diaries, or write blog posts to share with other colleagues. Assessment, look at both content and language if you're doing CLIL. It's not only language. Keep on learning, because this is truly fun and the learning never ends, because it's impossible to stop learning, isn't it? Well, this is all I have for you. We still, Katja, do you want to take over?
Thank you very much, Denise, for this excellent presentation. We have in the chat and the Q&A, good words for you on your presentation. You have done a good job. We have some questions here. We don't have much time. First of all, Mohammed was a little bit in doubt about communication in the 4 C's. So could you just very briefly give an extra explanation on the C for communication? How does that happen in a CLIL lesson?
Sure. So when we talk about communication in CLIL, so if we have a keyword, the keyword is language, okay? So it's what we language teachers are used to teaching. So if you think about communication, it's the language we've been taught to teach, right? So all these things, simple present, simple past, vocabulary of this and that, pronunciation, is the language we have been taught to teach. But in CLIL, this language doesn't exist in isolation. So when we talk about communication, it's using this language to communicate with ourselves in our thinking, in our doing particular activities, what I described as intrapersonal communication, and using this language to talk to other people. So that's interpersonal communication, right? So using this language to learn more, to make sense of things. And this is done in CLIL in a very, very much Vygotskian kind of way. So all theories of social learning and social cultural learning is a very strong theory there. It's all this idea that if I learn with you, you help me, I help you, and then I think a little bit with myself, and then I learn a bit more, and I go back to Katja, and Katja helps me a little bit. It's all this mingling of minds and people with language to help us move a little further. So this is basically, if I can summarize communication, I think this is how I understand communication in CLIL. So it's language, it's intra, it's inter, and it's also using thinking, our cognition. So it's getting some cognition there. So these are the key elements in communication. I hope it helps.
Great, Denise. Thank you very much. One more question from Giovanna. In a context of A1 or pre-A1 class, how could we teach students the first conditional to be used to calculate the areas in the maths example? No, without explaining the grammar and without using L1.
No, you wouldn't be doing that because they're just too young, isn't it? They're just too young, isn't it? And remember when I said we need to match the cognitive level of the student with the cognitive level of the content we are trying to teach. So what you would be doing, Giovanna, is looking at what your students are learning in their maths lessons. They might not even be called maths at that stage, isn't it? They might be, they would be doing some other things. You would be looking at what your students would be doing, those different subject areas, and you would be trying to integrate English to what your students are learning. You would be doing in English and through English what these students are learning in the other areas they're learning, right? You cannot have this mismatch in cognition. You simply cannot. I hope it.
All right. All right, Denise. So I think it's about time we finish. If we move on one more slide, please, Denise.
Sure.
So Denise is one of the authors of Global Changer, our teenage series. And if you want to find out more about Global Changer, you have the website. And if you feel like writing us an email, you have there, you can write to atendimento.br@cambridge.org. In the chat box, you will find the link for the feedback and also your certificate. Moving on. I think we can go. We would like to thank you very much for your participation. Denise, it was amazing. I'm sure I have learned a lot, and I am sure our participants have learned a lot. Wonderful class. Hope to have you more times here in our webinars.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.